of other health problems, and employers sometimes are savvy enough, large employers in particular, to have their HR folks, be able to assess people during these interviews and say, all other things being equal, I would rather hire the healthier looking employee, the one who will take less sick time off from work, the one who will cost us less to insure if it gets to that point, the one who, will not be taking time off for having all their teeth pulled, et cetera, plus just the social aspects of, what is it like to talk to an interviewee that's toothless or that's, that really needs to go to the dentist? This is a really interesting discussion, I thought. I mean, something I hadn't thought about. And, great argument for the importance of dental care and including it in low-income health care. And Bernie Sanders really been a champion of that. And not afraid to stand out there and sound kind of dopey screaming about dental care. But, making a real case for it. Anyway, back to health and safety cuts under sequester, according to the New York Times. A 3-week furlough, you'll care about this one because you eat, don't you? A 3-week furlough of all food safety employees will produce a shortage of meat, poultry, and eggs. How could that hurt you? Pushing prices higher and harming restaurants and grocers. Where are you, restaurateurs and grocers? Agriculture Department warns that public health could be affected by the inevitable black market sales of uninspected food. Ugh. When have we been talking? When have you ever heard that? Inevitable black market sales of uninspected food. That should be great. And, of course, the Center for Disease Control will be less able to monitor the effects of that thanks to their cuts and sequesters, too. So salmonella running wild, and no one will know where or when or what you should and shouldn't eat. And no one is reporting the purchase of these things anyway, and there will be no tracking them because they're black market. Wow, sounds like fun. Several air monitoring sites will shut down, as will more than 100 water quality projects around the country. About $100 million will be cut from Superfund enforcement, allowing companies to evade their responsibilities to clean up environmental disasters. You better believe they're going to suspend operations on anything that they aren't being monitored on. And by the way, air quality not being monitored. Good time for one of those chemical agent attacks. That'd be fantastic. That's got national security implications. Research. Nearly 1,000 grants from the National Science Foundation will be canceled or reduced, affecting research in clean energy, cybersecurity, and reforms of science and math education. Recreation. National parks will have shorter hours, and some will have to close camping and hiking areas. Firefighting and law enforcement will be cut back. Big deal? Well, that kind of cutback in national parks actually was part of what infuriated people during the 1995 government shutdown led by Newt Gingrich. Weirdly, that was like a huge irritant to people. Going to happen again. Defense personnel. And here I think red lights start to go off. Enlisted personnel are exempt from sequester reductions this year. But furloughs lasting up to 22 days will be imposed for civilian employees. Well, right, who cares, right? Well, they happen to do jobs like guarding military bases. We contracted that out. Handle budgets and teach the children of service members. Oh, yeah. Dependents. More than 40% of those employees, by the way, also happen to be veterans. So screw you, veterans. The military's health insurance program, TRICARE, the socialist program, you know it. Well, they could have a shortfall of up to $3 billion, which could lead to denial of elective medical care for retirees and dependents of active duty service members. Screw you, people. Military operations. Here's where it really starts to get heavy. The Navy plans to shut down 4 air wings on March 1st. After 90 days, get this, the pilots in those air wings will lose their certifications, and it will take 6 to 9 months and much money to retrain them. The Navy has also said the Nimitz and George H.W. Bush carrier strike groups will not be ready for deployment later this year because the service will run out of operations and maintenance money. This means the Truman and Eisenhower strike groups will remain deployed indefinitely, a decision affecting thousands of service members and their families. Thought they were coming home, did you? Continuous bomber flights outside of Afghanistan will be reduced, and there will be cutbacks to satellite systems and missile warning systems. Training and maintenance. The Army, which has done most of the fighting in Afghanistan and Iraq, says it will be forced to curtail training for 80% of its ground forces, and that by the end of the year, 2/3 of its brigade combat teams will fall below acceptable levels of combat readiness. 2/3 of its brigade combat teams out of action. Air Force pilots are expected to lose more than 200,000 flying hours. Beginning in March, roughly 2/3 of the Air Force's active duty combat units will curtail training at their home bases, and by July will no longer be capable of carrying out their missions. Some ship and aircraft maintenance will be canceled for the third and fourth quarters of the fiscal year, resulting in fewer available weapons. Last week, Senate Democrats, this article says, produced a much better plan to replace these cuts with a mix of new tax revenues and targeted reductions. Sort of a sensible, in-the-middle plan. Well, that sucks, right? You can't have that. About $55 billion would be raised by imposing a minimum tax on incomes of $1 million or more and ending some business deductions, while an equal amount of spending would be reduced from targeted cuts to defense and farm subsidies. Republicans immediately rejected the idea. The Senate Minority Leader, Mitch McConnell is his name, but I don't know what made me say that, but he called it a political stunt. Their proposal is to eliminate the defense cuts and double the ones on the domestic side, heedless of the suffering that even the existing reductions will inflict. Their refusal to consider new revenues means that on March 1st, Americans will begin learning how austerity, yes, they use the word, really feels. And that's the way it looks. By the way, stuff like these training exercises, keeping people up to speed in the military, not only extremely important for their readiness for their mission, which, remember, we're supposed to be able to instantly start fighting wars anywhere now in the global war on terror. We're not going to be able to do that. That can't have any implications that Republicans would care about because they never were interested in fighting the war on terror seriously anyway. But there you have it. But these things have to be planned pretty far in advance. I don't know that kicking the can down the road at the last minute prevents us from, actually having to say, well, you know what? The deadline for getting this stuff scheduled in the world of, macro gigantic logistics like the military, I had to cancel those training exercises well ahead of March 1st. Okay, so the fact that you kicked the can down the road and bought yourself another 2-month extension does not help me. I had to cancel those things. The deadline for canceling those things, for giving us a go, no-go signal on whether or not we're going to have those people in training, that passed a long time ago. I don't know whether kicking the can down the road really does much to help there, but they never think about this stuff. It doesn't occur to them. Nor do they care, because they've never been serious about this stuff. I don't know. Let's see. Let me just swing over to the Twitter wires over here while my boom creaks for all of you to read some of the things that have come through on the wires here. Here's a comment from somebody, by the way, I guess referring to all of the gun fail stuff. We can get to some of the fresh outrage there. Eli Deep says, in class this morning, a classmate says, I about got shot in the store Saturday. Some fella shot his pistol off in his pocket on accident. Gee, where is that happening? Well, maybe, Tennessee is where Eli is. We'll see if we can pick up on that story. Maybe we read it in the news. But I expect that most of this stuff, every time I do one of the gun fail things, I think I ought to remind everybody, I gather this information just by doing Google News search. My guess is there's twice as many stories out there that I don't find through Google, and twice as many, again, as that entire total happening without getting reported. I mean, and it's one thing to have your gun go off in a suburban store. You can't always hide that. But, if your gun goes off in a barn somewhere, even if it shoots you in the foot, you probably show up on a list somewhere at the hospital, but it doesn't necessarily make the paper. Forget about it if you, accidentally fire and it goes through the barn wall and just hits your truck. It doesn't hurt anybody. What are the chances that, out in rural Montana where not even a neighbor heard it because there's not a neighbor for, miles, that you would call the police and say, yeah, I know I'm supposed to report these things. So guess what? I had an accidental discharge of my rifle. I didn't hurt anybody, and I shot my own truck. Do you need to come out here? No, probably not. Maybe they do, maybe they don't once you call them. But are you going to call them? So I don't know. I don't know how much gun fail there is out there. We'll never know. So let's see. 10:15. That gives us a little bit of time to do a couple of things which I think are important. One, just to get the gun fail stories in there, because it's not a complete day unless we hit the latest gun fail. And there are some dumb ones, some new and very dumb ones that I've picked up. So I'll go down to the bottom here for the more recent ones. And you remember the toaster story. The toaster story is making the rounds, the toaster/oven story. But here's the new stuff. That was really a good one, by the way. And at this point, I'm now yawning at stories about people cleaning their guns and having them go off, unless I'm reporting them and I'm putting them in the gun fail compilations. And I believe that yesterday we finally found our 8th gun cleaning accidental discharge in this week's compilation. Some of them a little bit older than a week by now, but basically, yeah, continuing the pace of about once a day, people cleaning their guns and accidentally firing them. But there have been some new twists. One, there was the boring one in Pontiac, Michigan. Guy cleaned his gun, yawn, he shot himself, big deal, who cares? Well, what about this one? Down in Georgia, at Moody Air Force Base, we have a Moody Air Force airman, as I saw in the headline. He's not moody. That's the name of the base. But apparently he's pretty moody because after a hard day at work, he decided to go home and clean his gun too, or so he says. But at any rate, once again, I cleaned the gun. It was loaded. I didn't know it. I pulled the trigger. These hybrid stories. I was cleaning it, / didn't know it was loaded, / pulled the trigger, / was surprised that a bullet came out the other end when I did pull the trigger. I'm not really sure how this all works, but I gather that the reality of these things are usually that, people are screwing around with guns that they didn't think were loaded for whatever reason, and they pull the trigger and a bullet comes flying out, and so they say, I was cleaning it. So again, the truth lies somewhere in between. When the gun guys say no one ever really cleans a loaded gun. Everybody knows to unload their gun when they're cleaning it. I suspect people are lying about whether or not they were cleaning their guns. It's not cleaning them that's the dangerous activity. It's being stupid with them. Okay, granted. So then 8 people were stupid this week. And, that's just the people who claimed that their stupidity was cleaning their guns. I mean, in fact, 36 people so far have been kind of stupid this week. Because it's not just pretending you're cleaning your gun that makes you stupid. You can also shoot yourself in the leg with a holstered weapon or one that you're trying to holster while you're driving, looking for a parking spot at Walmart, which did happen. Yes, and I reported that one yesterday. But here's another one. This is our also yawning response to the Moraine, Ohio guy yesterday who shot himself with his concealed weapon. But this one didn't get reported yesterday because it happened yesterday, probably during the show, as a matter of fact. Another of our concealed carry ninja friends, this time a woman, had her gun out, playing around with it. Apparently really enjoyed playing with her gun. She was into it. And, good luck to her, whatever. But she was spinning it around on her finger, gunslinger style. And at some point, put the gun to her head and pulled the trigger thinking it was unloaded and found out that it was not. But she didn't really actually register that it wasn't, because by the time everybody figured out that it wasn't loaded, she was already dead. Yes, Florida. Royal Palm Beach, Florida. Yesterday, our concealed carry ninja of the day shot herself dead. And her friends had some interesting comments like, I wish I could wake her from the dead just so I could punch her in the face and ask her how she could be so stupid. Well, no need to ask her that now. We already know it's too late. And, just one of those interesting things. Again, gun folk who think a fun thing to do with their guns is to pretend shoot themselves. Well, one, eventually they do in fact shoot themselves. And two, that's actually not that cool. Just like we were talking about yesterday when we were reading the Wall Street Journal opinion piece, gun guys and gals in this case have a lot of responsibility, and a big one, on their hands about making gun safety cool again, if it ever was. But I mean, honestly, can that not be a thing where gun guys and gun gals can't say to others, you know what, I don't really kind of want to hang out and shoot with you. I don't really like the way you put the empty gun to your temple and pull the trigger. Yeah, it's not loaded. Yeah, I get the whole fascination with guns and the firing mechanism and stuff. Could you not put it to your head or my head or anything like that? Don't pull the trigger unnecessarily. I understand if you have to clean the thing and you want to check the action, etc., but let's quadruple check that is unloaded, and let's have more of those discharge barrels that they have at the gun shows out there. So that if you're cleaning your gun and for some reason you just think you're just not entirely competent to figure out whether there's a round in the chamber or whatever, fire it into these barrels. That's going to cause a lot of calls to cops as suburban people do it, but at least there won't be anyone dead on the other side. I don't know. I don't think that's too much to ask. All right. Other things that I've been holding on to here. Let me open up my sound machine over here. I've got a audio clip that was sent to me by Gideon. You remember, of course, that we had him on the air a couple days in a row, a week ago, or are we now 2 weeks ago? Has it been that long? I don't really know. But he's not always available to come on the air, and this is an easy way to get a couple of comments in when the phones aren't working, and the phones are a difficult thing to call in from overseas with. So he's sent us a recording about 2.5 minutes long, and I've broken it up into pieces, and maybe we can address parts of it today and parts of it tomorrow. He's got some comments. There are three basic topics here. One being Elizabeth Warren and her performance in the first round of hearings in the Banking and Finance Committee in the Senate. No, not the Finance Committee, but Banking. And how she has approached the regulatory scheme and some of the pluses and minuses of her performance as viewed through Gideon's eyes. But also he makes mention of the fact that, we kind of, once again, we'll just go back to the filibuster and say, really could have benefited from some serious reform there. Secondly, he brings up the Israel-Palestine issue, which on Daily Kos, as we know, is kind of a toxic issue. And I'm not 100% sure how I'm going to address that stuff or whether it needs my treatment of it, but we'll bring up what he has to say and see whether people have. I don't want to get too bogged down in Israel-Palestine, but it's out there. We can't ignore it. And then third, he actually points us to an interesting blog post, which I have in my pocket reader, and which might make an interesting point of discussion. So, you know what? Why don't we start with that? Because that, it seems to me, is something that we could look into and might be of more generalized interest, let's say. Israel-Palestine always gets people interested. But let's play what Gideon had to say on this Neuroskeptic post. This is a blog he's pointed us to before. It might be interesting to play this bit, and then let's take a look at that piece.
I have sent you a link to a recent post on the Neuroskeptic blog. The author of the blog is an advocate of science reform. A German researcher, Jonah Sassenhagen, has decided to grab the ball and run with it by registering a neuroscience study. I applaud Jonah for taking this step. I suggest that people do what I have done, email University of Marburg to thank them for what they are doing to improve science. Pre-registration is important because it is predictive. It is saying that I anticipate getting this specific result. Pre-registration covers the important parts of the study and is intended to highlight situations where people search around in data just to find any old correlation. And because it is often possible to find such a correlation, it is tempting to think that you have discovered something, whereas all you have really done is something not too dissimilar to seeing faces in clouds.
Now, I'll say this. It seems to me that that last part really grabbed me. The idea that you're maybe doing by how do I even put this? We'll have to read through the post to make more sense of this. But that really grabbed me. The idea of that looking at data and trying to discern a pattern might actually not be much more than looking at and seeing faces in clouds. That sounded really interesting to me. So let's take a look. He pointed me at this post. Unilaterally raising the scientific standard. This is at neuroskeptic.blogspot.co company.uk. So you know where it's coming from. It's coming from the UK. Neuroskeptic.blogspot.co.uk. That's a lot of dots. So rather than have you type in all those dots, I'll just tell you what is in this piece that he's pointed us to here. Unilaterally raising the scientific standard. For years, I and others have been arguing that the current system of publishing science is broken. Darkside, we'll have to have you come in and weigh in on this too. Publishing and peer-reviewing work only after the study's been conducted and the data analyzed allows bad practices, such as selective publication of desirable findings and running multiple statistical tests to find positive results to run rampant. So I was extremely interested when I received an email from Jonas Sassenhagen from the University of Marburg with the subject line, unilaterally raising the standard. Sassenhagen explained that he's chosen to pre-register a neuroscience study on a public database, the German Clinical Trials Register, the DRKS for short, by the way. His project, Alignment of Late Positive ERP Components to Linguistic Deviations, P600. Don't you ask me what that means. Well, it's designed to use EEG to test whether the brain generates a distinct electrical response, the P600, in response to seeing grammatical errors. This is very much beyond me in the science world, but I'd be interested to know whether there's an electronic response to grammatical errors. I know a very measurable response from some people I know. The background here is that the P600 certainly exists, but people disagree on whether it's specific to language, and Sassenhagen hopes to find out. By publicly announcing the methods that he'll use before collecting any data, Sassenhagen has, in my view, taken a brave and important step towards a better kind of science. I think this part, I can understand this, and I think I'll agree. Already, most journals require trials of medical treatments to be publicly pre-registered, and the DRKS is one such registry. This study, however, is pure neuroscience with nothing clinical about it, so it doesn't need to be registered. Sassenhagen just did it voluntarily. Further, I should point out that he offered to pre-register his data analysis pipeline too by sending it to me. Unfortunately, I didn't reply to the email in time, but that was purely my fault. We could do a study on that later. I hope very much and expect that others will follow in his footsteps. Unilaterally adopting pre-registration is one of the ways that I've argued reform could get started. As I said, this would, at the very least, place these adopters at an objective disadvantage. However, by voluntarily accepting such a disadvantage, it might be hoped that such actors would gain acclaim as more trustworthy than non-adopters. Pre-registration does put you in a disadvantage insofar as it limits your ability to use bad practice to fish for positive results. It means you can't cheat, essentially, which is a handicap if everyone else can. I don't know if this is the first time anyone's opted in to registering a pure neuroscience study, but it's certainly the first case I know of it being done for an entirely new experiment. There have, however, recently been many pre-registered attempts to replicate previously published results, e.g., the reproducibility of psychological science, the precognition replications, and an upcoming special issue of Frontiers in Cognition. Replications are good, registered ones doubly so, but they're not enough to fix bad practice on their own. To do that, we need to work on the source, original scientific research. Now, I can't add too much to the discussion on this, and perhaps we can work out a way for Gideon to do that if he'd like, or even better, to have opinions from multiple sources. You don't have to pre-register your opinions on this, by the way, but we're not conducting pure science here. But Dark Side might want to weigh on this. Mark Sumner might want to weigh on this. Greg Dworkin may want to weigh on this. Very interesting and out of my usual orbit. But that's why I like having listener contributions like this. Let's push it from here on, and everybody can send these suggestions, and everybody can take advantage of the same outlet, by the way. Send me recorded clips. That's fine. If you don't have the time or you don't listen live or the phone systems aren't working, whatever it is, what Gideon has done here is helpful. It helps us, explore new areas. I would never be reading this, but this does seem to make a certain amount of sense, and I think that for reality-based folk, not only do we need to check in every once in a while with the arbiters of reality, the scientists, but also check in on what's happening in their, in their reformation of their own methodologies. If you're going to understand science, it can't just be about reading the results. You can see that sometimes you get results reported and widely circulated that weren't necessarily what scientists were looking for. There's an advantage to being able to see if you can discern patterns that you might not have anticipated beforehand. But generally speaking, I like this idea of saying, look, this is what I think is going to happen. This is what I'm looking for. I may succeed. I may fail. But I'm not going to conduct an experiment looking for X, and if I accidentally find Y, pretend I was looking for Y all along. That seems to me to be a sound response and a sound approach to how they conduct these experiments to begin with. So, what else have I got that's sort of random? We've got half an hour. We can definitely take a look at those things. And I'll hold the rest of Gideon's comments for later or for tomorrow. And hopefully maybe we'll get a little bit of response by way of email or Twitter or whatever on anybody else's thoughts on this interesting development in the scientific world. So, what has caught my eye elsewhere? Let's make it a hodgepodge, this show. A couple of things. First of all, by the way, just to switch back to gun fail a little bit. I don't have a category for this one, but Joan McCarter sent me this one, and so I wanted to make some mention of it because I'm not sure how to categorize it. I don't know if it's going to be included in gun fail or not. It's not fail per se. I mean, it's a terrible idea what this person is doing, and it's citizenship fail more than anything else. But it's not gun fail per se because he meant to shoot at people, and he did. So what do we got here? Just, your basic road rage type incident, but where? Boise, Idaho, where everybody knows about guns and was raised with guns and you people don't understand, et cetera, et cetera. Fatal shooting closes Franklin Road near Boise Town Square from the Idaho Statesman. Your ho-hum hometown news kind of item, but check out what this guy's up to. A man was found shot in his car near Boise Town Square Monday evening, prompting a police investigation that closed down a portion of Franklin Road for several hours. Yada yada, medics called in, terrible situation, guy's dead. How does this happen? Well, no one really sure about it until they begin to investigate. And let's take a look at what they find once they investigate, because there's a bigger story here, and we'll look at the link that Joan sent us because it's got an update. Did road rage lead to this murder? Well, the cops say they've got information that connects a suspect in this killing to a suspect in a hit and run in Boise same day. Now, the police in Boise are still calling the murder of Matthew Moeller Kearns the responsibility of this dude they arrested. And boy, does he looks like a fine fellow. Sean Fisher does. A little bit beat up in this photo too. I'm not sure exactly where that came from, but check this out. So they find this 28-year-old guy, Matthew Moeller Kearns, dead, and pronounce him dead just before 9 p.m. on Monday at the hospital. Paramedics took him there after he was found with a gunshot wound to the head, sitting in a stopped car on the westbound lane of Franklin Road near Benjamin Lane. Just how or whether that death links to Fisher is what police are still working on, figuring out 2 days later. Well, seems they've figured some of it out, because here's an update. Boise police said Wednesday that Fisher is now accused of shooting at another driver before Moeller Kearns was killed. And that might have started over a parking dispute. No mention of the death of Mueller-Kearns was made during Fisher's first court appearance on Wednesday, but more information was released on the first shooting, including information that police have recovered the bullet shot into the first car. So this guy is pissed off and shooting into 2 cars in a single day. Ends up killing somebody. Fisher is being held in the Ada County Jail on $500,000 bond on felony charges of aggravated battery and aggravated assault in connection with the hit-and-run crash/shooting Monday night. He's also charged with a misdemeanor count of kicking a police dog, which is probably never a good idea. He's not yet charged in connection with the death of Mueller-Kearns. But police arrested Fisher after a short chase on foot, no less, in South Boise, where officers used a canine dog and a taser to arrest the guy, who was armed at the time, according to the reports. This is how police say the cases fit together, according to interviews and court records. A Boise man told police he parked his maroon sedan, it's important that it's maroon apparently, across 2 parking spaces. How annoying, right? At the apartment complex off Canal Street just before 8 p.m. Monday, because he had to run up into his home to get something he forgot. We've all been there. When he came down, he saw a white Geo Prism stopped right by his car with the lights shining on it. It's a very tough guy car, the white Geo Prism. Well, that man got into his sedan, and he told police that he pulled out of the parking lot and onto Canal Street, and that's when the driver of the Geo, later identified as Fisher, pulled out of another driveway into the parking lot, got behind his car, and rammed into the back of it. Witnesses say Fisher then drove the Geo next to the maroon car and fired 1 shot inside and sped away, going south on Vista towards Interstate 84. The victim told police he saw Fisher's passenger window shatter. There's a gun fail right there, right? You get a road rage incident and you want to shoot the guy next to you and you forget to roll down your own window and you blow it out. So that's never helpful. And although it's nice of you to leave a clue like that for the police when they finally round you up. Well, the guy said he saw the passenger window shatter and then heard a thump as the bullet hit his driver's side door. He was not hurt. The man drove to work, called the cops, and told them what happened. Later on, shortly after 8:20 p.m., Boise police received a 911 call from someone who found that Mueller-Kearns had been shot in his vehicle, a silver sedan, which was also near this same area. While police were investigating that, the county sheriff's deputies were sent to Fisher's stepmother's home after getting another 911 call about a man standing outside a home threatening to hurt residents. Prosecutors on Wednesday said that Fisher sent his stepmother text messages threatening to hurt her, probably while he was driving, too. Not a good idea. But the guy's already firing at other people while driving. I think he's already a menace. Anyway, so here he is, fighting with people over parking spaces, shooting at another guy who God only knows what happened. Did he cut him off? Did he just get in his way? Whatever. But basically what's happening here is this. A dumbass has gotten a hold of a .38 and thinks he's king of the world. We just read the other day about another gun fail story, about another person who pulls a weapon and says, don't F around in a concealed carry state, and part of a road rage incident. Between that and remember the guy who went out to investigate the prowler in his neighbor's yard and ended up getting shot with his own gun? We should try to find a follow-up. I wonder if there's any more clues in that and find out whether he shot himself or whether the prowler he crept up on actually wrestled the gun away and shot him or what. But this is a phenomenon not often discussed, and I think one that's overlooked, and that maybe the guy who wrote the Wall Street Journal piece that we read yesterday might agree with. We have to start talking about, in addition to the additional confidence, let's say, that remember how that's how the Wall Street Journal opinion writer wrote yesterday, but that it's a self-esteem builder to become the master of this death-dealing machine, etc. Well, not everybody masters it, for one thing. And not everybody is a good fit as the master of a death-dealing machine. Because I think they very often go and do things they ought not. And that minus the gun, they would be sensible enough to decide not to do. And I think we have a crystallized example of it here. And it's rare, to be sure, but it happens. And I think that what is not rare is this artificial boost in confidence that comes with being armed. I think they all get it. When you're armed, you just have that confidence. And that's actually, that's the benefit that gun guys will tell you that they're after. I bought it specifically for the boost in confidence. Okay, fair enough. Nothing criminal about being confident in your ability to protect yourself. The problems arise when you begin seeing opportunities to quote-unquote defend yourself where they weren't before. It's what I have been calling the when all you have is a hammer syndrome, after the old saying, when all you have is a hammer, everything looks like a nail, right? When you're armed and you're carrying not only that weapon but that additional confidence, you do things like say, it would be a good idea and helpful to my community if I intervened with this prowler, or what I think is a prowler, in my neighbor's yard, rather than call 911. Why wait around for the government to respond when I can intervene on my own, except that I might get shot, either by my own gun or by this prowler? I mean, why wouldn't this prowler be armed? Why wouldn't this prowler want to shoot me if I sneak up on him? Or stab me, which is what actually happened. Why not? Right? Or what more frequently happens, I think, is people like this wacko in Boise who says, I'm pissed off because of parking. I will shoot this person. I'm pissed off because of bad driving. I will shoot this person. Minus the gun. I mean, make it anything you want. Any self-defense weapon you want. Taser, mace, knife, anything. Can you do it while you're driving? Can you do it without getting out of your car? If not, it probably doesn't happen. Now, there are road rage stabbings. I'm certain of it. You get in an accident, people pull out, they, argue with one another, and instead of exchanging insurance information, as you should do, they stab one another. I'm positive that happens. But they shoot one another a lot, too. Let's not dismiss that. But, yeah, I think people also tend to say, like, for instance, minus the gun, they may argue about the thing. People are weird. People are irrational. But I think the gun changes the equation. I think they get out, and suddenly we're a little more sure than we would have been otherwise that the accident is the other guy's fault. And if he doesn't agree, by God, I'll stick a gun in his face. And if he still doesn't agree, well, maybe I'll just shoot him. Of course, I'll wait for him to make the first move so that I can shoot him in self-defense. Not everybody is completely removed from reality, but they begin looking for more opportunities to spark other people's attacks so that they can defend themselves against those attacks. I think that happens a lot, and I think that needs to be addressed. You know where they do address it? You remember in the article where the guy, the gun guy from the Wall Street Journal yesterday. If I was a good reporter, I'd keep his name handy. But you remember that. I thought it was a fascinating article, but he does make mention of the fact that one of the shooters he talked to, a competitive shooter, said that she thought of marksmanship and shooting as a martial art. More like that, please. Because what do they teach you in martial arts training? One of the things they teach you, although that's getting perverted now too, is this is a self-defense mechanism. And your first obligation in self-defense is to remove yourself from a dangerous situation. Run away if you can. I mean, maybe we're Karate Kid-izing what they actually teach you. But, I mean, my kids have been through Taekwondo, which is not necessarily the world's greatest self-defense mechanism. It's about a lot of other things. And it's also a competitive sparring sport, too. But in most martial arts training, they make fairly prominent mention of the fact that you've been given a gift and responsibility here. It will increase your confidence that you can defend yourself with your bare hands. And in fact, confidence is a major component of teaching kids or anybody martial arts and self-defense. It's supposed to be. But you're also instructed, this is not for play. You don't roundhouse kick your friends in the face for fun. You don't back hook kick your mom when she says it's time for you to clean up your room. And you don't pick fights. And if fights are picked with you, your responsibility is what? Remove yourself from them. But if you have no other choice, you should be prepared to defend yourself. And that's what martial arts are about. And that's the way you should approach guns and shooting. And yet, There is no training, and gun guys are in the business, or avocation anyway, of lobbying for less training. How many states are currently in the middle of trying to remove any permitting necessity whatsoever for concealed carry? Utah is, and by the way, just I might note for the record that the Diocese of Salt Lake City, the Catholic Diocese of Salt Lake City, lobbied against this rule. They think it makes no Christian sense for people to arm themselves at all times and to settle their disputes that way. And that the culture of intimidation is not one that the Catholic Diocese wants to promote. In fact, it's one they'll actively oppose. Now, how much leverage does a Catholic diocese have in Salt Lake City? Not much. But it's nice to see the Catholic Church doing what it's supposed to be doing from time to time. They got enough problems. They don't need to create another one by coming out in favor of political expediency. But maybe there's no such thing as political expediency for Catholics in Salt Lake City anyway. But an interesting observation, I thought, that the competitive shooters thought of their shooting as a martial art. Not one. You probably won't find competitive shooters saying, yeah, I'm going to shoot people over road rage. But then you never know. At least they wouldn't shoot them with their finely tuned competition gun. But that's not to say that they wouldn't have something strapped to their leg that they would do it with too. But yeah, gun guys, gun culture, I think it's on you, I say as an outsider. But, well, I think you should take it on yourself. Let's make sure that this stuff is minimized. Among martial artists, if there's any parallel to martial arts in shooting, it's well known how you use this and how you don't. But there's sort of a yeehaw backslapping dismissal of this stuff as long as it doesn't end up in somebody actually getting wounded or at least killed. Sometimes wounds are still, sources of laughter. But, when are we going to see this? When are we going to see people say, hey, I'm not going to hang out with you. I'm not going to shoot with you. I don't want to see your new gun because you're dumb and dangerous. You're not allowed to hang out with me. You're not allowed to shoot next to me at the range. I don't think the range should let you in here at all. If you're going to do quick draw shooting and shoot yourself in the foot. I don't know. There's no way of, this is not meant to be a government role, obviously, and the writer who mentioned this was specific about that. I can't see any way that it would be. But this is a private peer-to-peer role that gun guys right now are not playing amongst themselves and really have to. Not a huge important story or anything from Boise, but just a great example of what's happening everywhere. It's a good story because it's happening everywhere, and it's happening everywhere because it's happening in Boise too. You've heard these stories from cities, eastern and western. Well, Boise as well. No difference here. Okay, other random stuff that I've got, by the way. In the Atlantic, I noted I picked up from a tweet from Molly Ball the other day that I wanted to make mention, at least of the headline here. It has been 951 days since the Senate passed a major new law. If you're wondering whether President Obama's ambitious second-term agenda has a chance to make it through Congress, that might be worth keeping in mind. Here's an impressive fact about life in today's Washington. The last time a major new piece of policy legislation passed the U.S. Senate was July 15th, 2010. Now, this is dated February 20th, and I guess doesn't take into account the violence against women reauthorization, because that's not done deal, but that did at least pass the Senate. But interesting. So they're pointing here to Dodd-Frank, which we mentioned yesterday people are now trying to challenge as unconstitutional. So that would undo a pretty major piece of a major accomplishment. The last piece of major legislation passed through the Senate. Now, I don't think it is unconstitutional, but there you go. So that talk about fighting your battles on all fronts, right? Republicans are not only preventing the United States Senate from passing anything, but once it does pass something, it tries to declare it unconstitutional from top to bottom. Anyway, not just Dodd-Frank. What would be the biggest piece of legislation passed before that? I don't know whether it immediately preceded it or not, but clearly you'd have to go back to the Affordable Care Act, which, of course, Republicans are spending no end of their resources on trying to declare unconstitutional. Well, anyway, the article goes on for some, but I thought that was rather an important point to make. So 951 days since the passage of a major piece of legislation through the Senate. The article continues that pessimistic analyses of the prospects for the Obama agenda have mostly focused on the recalcitrant GOP-led House of Representatives. But Obama's problem may actually be with the House of Congress his party controls. House Speaker John Boehner has signaled that he'll consider proposals that make it through the Senate, the Democrat-controlled Senate. Based on recent history, that could be a tall order. Lest you think this is about Republican obstruction of the Senate's of the Democrats' Senate majority via the filibuster, that's only part of the problem. Note that this period of inaction doesn't quite correlate with the last time Democrats had 60 votes, which was January 2010. And the Senate has actually done plenty of things in the past 2 years and 7 months. The deals that ended the 2011 debt ceiling fight and the recent fiscal cliff, for example, as well as contentious items like the highway bill and reapproval of the Export-Import Bank. In other words, the Senate has done some big stuff, bipartisan stuff, and controversial stuff. It just hasn't done anything that the president could add to his list of policy accomplishments. For that, the kind of thing a president might talk about in his campaign speeches, it's been more than 2.5 years. One possible quibble with this argument is the repeal of Don't Ask, Don't Tell, arguably a major legacy accomplishment for Obama. Even if you count that, the repeal measure cleared the Senate on December 18th, 2010. That's still 795 days. Why is this the case? Republicans would say it's evidence of Obama's lack of juice with even members of his own parties in Congress. A persistent and extremely well-documented phenomenon over the course of the Obama presidency. They say it's also a part of a larger pattern of Senate dysfunction that's been obscured by the noisier and even more spectacular dysfunction that plagues the House. As Republicans love to point out, the Senate also has not passed a budget since April 2009. It has passed alternative government funding bills in the interim, and the last Obama proposed budget plan received exactly 0 votes and symbolic votes, roll calls in both the House and Senate. Democrats disagree that this dynamic will kill Obama's second-term agenda. It's true they acknowledge that the Senate's bandwidth has been dominated by averting immediate disaster for the last couple of years, but the 2012 election changed everything, they say, and the appetite to tackle big issues has returned. As one Senate Democratic leadership aide told me in an email, folks were exhausted from the 111th Congress and felt like they needed to shore up their bona fides on deficit reduction after the 2010 results. Plus, we looked across the Capitol at the House and figured there wasn't much point in tossing good legislation into their emboldened maw of the Tea Party. Now it's different. The House R's and the Tea Party had their moment and jumped the shark. We feel like we have the upper hand on virtually every major issue, including taxes, and the public overwhelmingly prefers our approach on deficit reduction. Plus, we have more seats in both houses, so while I don't disagree that we may not have done a ton in the 112th, I would argue that catching our breath then and shoring up our credentials on fiscal issues and taxes has put us in good position to get a lot of big things done in the 113th. Immigration and guns are perfect examples. You never saw the kind of bipartisan cooperation that's going on with these two huge issues in 112th, and we are only 2 months into the Congress. Has everything changed? Is the Senate, that's been sitting on its hands for the last 2 years now, ready to get moving on big things? The next few months will tell. We'll find out. And I'll probably be asked a little bit about this later today as I head downtown, which I hate to do, but, every once in a while I have to conduct an interview for Australian television's Planet America. Maybe some of you are familiar with it, maybe not. One of the co-hosts is a Twitter pal, and so he has come and asked me whether I might be able to make myself available for that. I'm moving around with the microphone a little bit, but Chaz Licciardello, which I'm giving the Italian-ish pronunciation. I don't know whether Chaz says it in his Australian accent, but maybe you know him as Chaz Lich. That's ChasLicc on Twitter. But yeah, he's co-host of Planet America. Plus, he's got another show, I believe, on Australian television. So I'm going to head down there at about 4. Well, that's when I'll be on the air with them at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. God only knows what time it is in Australia. I think it's like, 16 hours ahead of us. So it's Friday It'll be Friday morning when I speak to them, but I think their show actually airs in the evening. I don't know. It's all screwed up. But we'll be talking filibuster on there. And yes, the show and the segment will be available online like at normal times, because you can watch whatever you want, whenever you want to on the internet. So we'll see how that segment goes. But I'm sure we'll be asked that question. Are they going to be able to do anything in this Senate without having really and truly and deeply reformed the filibuster? I'll tell you what, I don't know who Molly's source was on this email, and I don't think they're terribly off base, but I'll bet you it comes from the camp that was not terribly sympathetic to the calls for filibuster reform. It may be, it might be a Schumer type who, has a foot in each camp, perhaps, but it doesn't. Wow, it's a tough one because without eating up your entire segment of 9 minutes or so, or the last 5 minutes of this show, it's tough to answer the question. There's certainly the possibility. I don't think that it was absolutely crucial that we have all of the filibuster reforms in place in order to get anything done. In other words, I don't think that it's absolutely the case that nothing whatsoever can get done. It's an absolute impossibility to get anything done without having reformed the filibuster in the bigger ways that we advocated for. But it would take an awful lot of luck. Whereas it would take considerably less luck and allow us to focus more on the policy if we knew, for instance, that we would get an up or down vote on some of this stuff. So it was extremely important to get the reforms through, and we just didn't. It's not the death knell for everything, but it sure makes you look like a sunny optimist to start saying, yeah, we're really going to start cooperating now, because we're really not. Now, if you were pointing to the Hagel filibuster as proof of that, I think you will find that plank pulled out from under you next week. As Greg mentioned at the outset of the show, and as we talked about as a possibility as early as last week, I think what Republicans are doing there is a delaying game, and it's going to end up looking more like the hold, which they said they were exercising, but which we said doesn't really exist in the same form anymore, or never really did for nominations. But it's going to end up looking more like that thing which they said it was, and less like that thing that we said it was, and they denied it was, a filibuster. But in fact, it's just a failed filibuster, but a filibuster nonetheless. But it is one that I think that they'll reverse themselves on, probably as soon as next week. Hagel will end up being confirmed, and history will record this whole episode with a bit of a haze, and it will be something that is deniable as a filibuster later on. The next time a cabinet nominee is filibustered, whether by Republicans or Democrats, people will point to this Hagel filibuster, and at that time Republicans will say, no, it really wasn't a filibuster, because after all, he eventually got confirmed, so we didn't filibuster him at all. And then we'll get into this weedy discussion, but hopefully you will have had the background by then so that we can avoid the bogging down and simply say, yeah, we all know you were full of it then, and that probably means you're full of it now. One last item that I want to mention for today, and maybe we can have discussion on it tomorrow at greater length, and maybe we can pull a guest in on this one. California. Speaking of Greg's comments, we were talking about polling, of course, at the top of the show. There's some polling from California that is interesting. Californians, it says in the Sacramento Bee, thanks to David Siders, Californians are in a sunnier mood, lifting public approval ratings of the legislature and Jerry Brown, the governor, Governor Moonbeam, as people sometimes derisively call him. Well, the moonbeams are working. Following years of budget deficits and discouragement about the future, California's mood appears finally to have improved. For the first time in 6 years, a plurality of California voters think the state is heading in the right direction, according to a field poll released today. Governor Jerry Brown's approval rating vaulted above 50% for the first time since he took office in 2011. this time around anyway. And even the legislature's job performance rating rose 11 percentage points to a marginally less embarrassing 36%. A majority of voters believe the greater control Democratic lawmakers gained over the legislature on Election Day is good for California, according to the poll. It's a big change from where we've been over the last 2 or 3 years, poll director Mark DiCamillo said. Californians may not be satisfied with California's overall economy, he said, but they are viewing it through a prism of state governance and the budget. And what was once a major multi-billion-dollar deficit is now apparently in balance, and that's something they feel good about. California is heavily Democratic, and the electorate's improving outlook comes despite California's still high unemployment rate of 9.8%. What is happening here? What's happening here, if you ask California Democrats, is that California has finally freed itself from Republican influence. That is to say, they finally defeated enough of the Republicans in the state legislature that they were able to get the ridiculous supermajorities that it took to do something serious about the budget, tax the people who needed to be taxed in order to make it happen, and Californians say, this is working, this is good. In uncertain economic times, their lot is improving, and they know it. And they're happy about how it happened, they're happy about what's been done, and they are, for the first time in a long time, saying we're on the right track. Why? Purging crazy Republicans from the government. That was the trick. Things are turning around. Unemployment, yes, still high. But do they have a positive outlook? For the first time in years, they finally do. And a budget to go along with it, too. We should talk to some of our friends in the California Democratic ranks about this and see if they think that the same phenomenon is at work. How interesting. I'll be back tomorrow. I'll talk to you again about this and other things. I'm David
From
Roman,
Daily Kos Radio on netrootsradio.com. You have been listening to the Kagro in the Morning Show
with David Waldman.